Okay, now let's talk about servicing an aircraft before you send it out for a flight or on a mission. So servicing is going to consist of a couple of things, but mainly it's just to get it ready for flight. You're going to make sure it has enough fuel. You're going to make sure it has enough hydraulic fluid. Make sure the engines are good on oil, and make sure that the oxygen is serviced. And in certain circumstances, you may be called to de-ice the airplane. So let's just take them one at a time. First off, let's talk about oil. Now, oil can be checked through either a sight glass or a dipstick. Typically, a dipstick you'll find on reciprocating engines, though you can find them on turbine engines. It's fairly rare. You usually almost always will do a sight glass on those, and you almost never really see a sight glass on reciprocating engines. At least I don't think I've ever encountered one. It's almost always going to be a dipstick. Now, the rule of thumb is that for reciprocating engines, you're going to want to check the oil before the flight, so that way the oil is settled and you know how much oil is in the system. However, with turbine engines, you're going to check it after the last flight and make sure that the engine oil is good. Reason being is that dry sump systems will generally tend to hide the oil quantity that they have, and you'll come in there and you'll see that the oil is low, and you'll add oil to it, and then next thing you know, it's over pressurized or it's too much oil in the system. Now, if you put too much oil in the system, what will end up happening is that the oil will, instead of like circulating and removing the heat and the contaminants, it'll froth, and as it froths, it loses its engine cooling capabilities, and it can potentially damage the engine. It can also overpressurize the whole system. On the OH-58, there is a rubberized or bulletproof oil sump. If you overfill that and it gets overpressurized, they would explode, and it makes quite the mess, because it's a lot of turbine engine oil all over the place. Not to mention that it's like not good at all for the engine. And so that was something that we've seen in the past, and you don't want to replicate that your first day on the job. So make sure that you're filling the engine oil up to the correct levels. Now, hydraulic fluid is almost always in the same vein. Like, it's almost always a sight glass, and you want to make sure there's enough hydraulic fluid that's there. Now, typically on heavy commercial aviation, it's always going to be SkyDraw, and that stuff is not something that you want to get on your hands. It really will burn your eyes, will burn everything. And so you want to make sure that you're wearing the right PPE before you start handling it, in case some of it were to spill. I've had it spill like out of the aircraft onto me, and I'm still wondering if I'm going to get some kind of cancer from that, because it burnt me to a crisp. Like, get all down from my midway through my chest all the way down to my feet, and it was a long ride home to get those clothes changed. So you don't want to get that on you at all. Some places will require you to wear PPE. Some places will just kind of like say, there it is, and they won't pay any attention to it. My recommendation to you is always service it with at least some iPro on, bare minimum, and preferably some gloves. Depending on the situation, you may be able to use like an apron or whatever else, but that's fairly rare, and so fairly rare for them to have it available for you. But you will absolutely do yourself a favor by making sure that you don't get that stuff on your hands and on your face and things like that. General aviation hydraulic fluid is usually going to be 5606. It's just not nearly as bad. Still not good for you on your hands, but it's not going to burn or have that burning sensation like SkyDraw will. Now, in terms of oxygen, oxygen is usually pretty easy to service, honestly. You'll either have an oxygen tank, and you'll hook it up to the aircraft per the maintenance manual, and you'll fill it up, or you'll change tanks out, or maybe there's no oxygen to service on it at all. Like for this Aztec, there is no oxygen system on board. The only type of oxygen that you would have would be supplemental that you would bring with you as a pilot, and that's not something that we really have to mess with. It's really on the pilot at that point. One word of caution with oxygen, though, is that oxygen in its pure form will react to petroleum, and so it'll cause a fire or cause an explosion. There are stories of people putting Vaseline on and then putting their oxygen mask on and burning their face. So you definitely want to prioritize doing oxygen as early in the shift as possible before you get exposed to any other type of chemicals that are out there that it could react to. So make sure that as you service that oxygen, your hands are clean. There's no chance that anything will get on your hands, or there's no chance that there's any oil or anything that is going to get in contact with the oxygen, because that will be a mistake that you don't want to make. So an aircraft can't take off with ice on the wings. The reason being is that the presence of ice spoils the lift as the air goes over the top of the wings, causing a separation and a lack of ability to stay in the air. When you're flying along and you get ice built on the wing, it can be kind of scary, because all of a sudden the plane just doesn't want to keep its altitude, it just keeps going down. And it's been the cause of many aircraft being crashed in the past. So there could be a situation where you have to remove the ice from the wing or from the aircraft in general before it's allowed to leave. Now, this is pretty straightforward. It's usually taking some sort of chemical or like hot water and blowing the ice off. It's usually you will typically do that after the aircraft is set up outside in icing conditions for an extended period of time. Now, once it's running, the aircraft has systems on board to keep ice from building up. You could have de-ice boots that inflate and deflate with bleed air, causing the ice to crack and fall off the wings. It could have a system that seeps anti-icing fluid out, and it can have heated veins that run through the wing to cause the ice to melt and not form there. Either way, before it's able to be cranked and put out to service, ice needs to be removed if it's there, and you may end up having to do that as part of the servicing of an aircraft before it takes off. It's important to mention that however an aircraft is to be serviced should be done in accordance with the maintenance manuals. If you have a new aircraft that you don't know exactly what to do, go to the maintenance manual. It will tell you how to service that aircraft appropriately for flight. It'll tell you what to look for, what to be wary of, and what needs the most attention. And when we're servicing oxygen, there's three types of oxygen that are out in the wide world that we need to be aware of. One is industrial, one is medical, and one is aviators breathing oxygen. Industrial is just not defined or developed to the same purity that we need it to be able to use it as breathing air. And medical has water involved in it, which is not necessarily ideal for flight. So only use aviators breathing oxygen on aircraft, lest you're in a regulatory violation for one, but you could actually cause someone to be harmed if you use it. Now, whenever you're supplying gaseous oxygen, so that you have oxygen lines that are hooked up to the aircraft and you're pumping oxygen in, make sure that there's one person on the cart and another person that's operating on the aircraft. That make sure the power is off, no other maintenance is being happening. The only thing that's happening on that airplane is oxygen is being transferred onto it. Reason being is that oxygen is extremely flammable. It's very unstable in its pure form and can cause explosions, fires. It can burn your skin if you're too close to it whenever it's coming off, because it'll cause frostbite. And so you want to take oxygen extremely seriously, because it could very easily result in catastrophe if you don't respect it. All right, so when we talk about servicing an aircraft's fuel system, there are three types of fuel that we generally will deal with in aviation. One is called MoGas, which is nothing more than automotive gas. And this is really popular with light sport aircraft. You can take a regular 100 low lead airplane engine and do some STC work to it and get it to where it can take automotive gas. And as avgas climbs in price, you're going to see more and more of these types of STCs at play. And so you'll see more and more MoGas being used in the future. The next step up, and probably one of the more probably the most common general aviation fuel is called 100 low lead. It's 100 octane, and then the low lead means that there's still lead in that gas to help stabilize it at altitude, so that way it won't detonate. It's blue in color, and that lead will leave lead deposits wherever the exhaust fumes go, because the lead won't burn off. And so in a lot of these reciprocating engines, you'll go through and you'll take apart the exhaust system, you'll see these white streaks, and those are fuel leaks or exhaust leaks, where the exhaust has gone over there and deposited the little white bits of lead. If you get it on your hands and it dries or whatever, you'll notice there's kind of a substance that's left behind. That's the lead in the 100 low lead. Now, back in the 70s, they got rid of lead as a additive to fuel because it's obviously really bad for you. So it's definitely not something you want to get your hands on or ingest in any way if you can at all avoid it. It's not like you're gonna like melt like an ice cream cone like if it gets on you, but it's definitely not good for your long-term health. So try to stay away from it as best you can. However, that being said, 100 low lead is a common solvent for cleaning engine parts and things like that. But keep in mind, if you do that, it's also very, very flammable. So you want to make sure you mitigate that risk. Now, there are other octanes of avgas that are out there, but by far the most common one you're going to see is 100 low lead, just almost all the time. Now, as far as jet fuels go, there's Jet A, Jet A1, and Jet B. So Jet A is going to be your most common jet fuel that you'll see being used in turbine engines. Jet A1 is a mixture, and Jet B is a mixture of jet fuel and avgas together. Usually it's mixed up by a mechanic. Now, I've never seen a situation where you have to do that, but it is a thing that people do out there. Now, Jet A1 is made from kerosene. This is Jet A, but A1 is coming from a different, it's coming from kerosene. Jet A, though, is by far going to be the most common aviation fuel that's out there. It's what goes in all your heavy commercial aviation aircraft. It's what goes in our Lear. It goes in most ground power units. Jet A1 or Jet A is by far the most common aviation fuel out there. Now, military applications, you'll see JP8. JP8 is a little bit different, but JP8, Jet A, usually they're interchangeable. All right, so when we talk about servicing an aircraft's fuel system, there are three types of fuel that we generally will deal with in aviation. One is called MoGas, which is nothing more than automotive gas. And this is really popular with light sport aircraft. You can take a regular 100 low lead airplane engine and do some STC work to it and get it to where it can take automotive gas. And as avgas climbs in price, you're going to see more and more of these types of STCs at play. And so you'll see more and more MoGas being used in the future. The next step up, and probably one of the more probably the most common general aviation fuel is called 100 low lead. It's 100 octane, and then the low lead means that there's still lead in that gas to help stabilize it at altitude, so that way it won't detonate. It's blue in color, and that lead will leave lead deposits wherever the exhaust fumes go, because the lead won't burn off. And so in a lot of these reciprocating engines, you'll go through and you'll take apart the exhaust system, you'll see these white streaks, and those are fuel leaks or exhaust leaks, where the exhaust has gone over there and deposited the little white bits of lead. If you get it on your hands and it dries or whatever, you'll notice there's kind of a substance that's left behind. That's the lead in the 100 low lead. Now, back in the 70s, they got rid of lead as a additive to fuel because it's obviously really bad for you. So it's definitely not something you want to get your hands on or ingest in any way if you can at all avoid it. It's not like you're gonna like melt like an ice cream cone like if it gets on you, but it's definitely not good for your long-term health. So try to stay away from it as best you can. However, that being said, 100 low lead is a common solvent for cleaning engine parts and things like that. But keep in mind, if you do that, it's also very, very flammable. So you want to make sure you mitigate that risk. Now, there are other octanes of avgas that are out there, but by far the most common one you're going to see is 100 low lead, just almost all the time. Now, as far as jet fuels go, there's Jet A, Jet A1, and Jet B. So Jet A is going to be your most common jet fuel that you'll see being used in turbine engines. Jet A1 is a mixture, and Jet B is a mixture of jet fuel and avgas together. Usually it's mixed up by a mechanic. Now, I've never seen a situation where you have to do that, but it is a thing that people do out there. Now, Jet A1 is made from kerosene. This is Jet A, but it's A1 is coming from a different, it's coming from kerosene. Jet A, though, is by far going to be the most common aviation fuel that's out there. It's what goes in all your heavy commercial aviation aircraft. It's what goes in our Lear. It goes in most ground power units. Jet A1 or Jet A is by far the most common aviation fuel out there. Now, military applications, you'll see JP8. JP8 is a little bit different, but JP8, Jet A, usually they're interchangeable. Okay, so it's really important that you use the appropriate grade for that engine. There's any number of things that could go wrong if you do something different. On a turbine engine, could you probably start it with avgas? Probably, but it would probably run too hot and then do permanent damage to the engine, and it'd probably do it at the most inopportune time. It wouldn't produce the right power. It would have all kinds of wild internal characteristics. There's no telling exactly what would go wrong with it. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're using the right fuel that engine was built for, so it has the right spray pattern, has the right heating and cooling characteristics that it was engineered for, and that it produces the appropriate amount of power that you need to get the aircraft off the ground. If you were to try to run something different in like a 100 low lead engine, that engine is built, and the ignition system specifically was built to fire with 100 low lead. And so if you have a bunch of gunk that comes up with jet fuel, or which is effectively like diesel fuel, like it's going to end up having a lot of gunk build up on the spark plugs, and it'll foul and the engine won't work anymore. In addition to creating all kinds of other problems in the fuel system, that it's going to take you a while if you ever get it all out and get it all cleaned up. There can be all kinds of different contaminants inside of fuel on top of that, and so on top of not only getting the right fuel in the aircraft, you also want to make sure that it's a non-contaminated fuel, that's clean and it's ready to be fired. In the list of contaminants, you could have just simple dirt, and this is like a system. These are systems that are extremely sensitive to any sort of contaminant floating around inside of that fuel. You'll see 10 micron fuel filters, 5 micron fuel filters. A micron is incredibly small, so 10 microns, not a lot of room to play with. The 8083 calls out and says that like some of these contaminants that can derail a fuel system are 1/20th of the size of a human hair, and that's really, really small. I mean, like, you think about how small a hair is, and then it's just a fraction of that. So any contaminants inside of a fuel system are just totally unacceptable. Now, some of the examples of contaminants, like I said, were dirt, but also water. Water is one that's really, really big. We'll teach you how to sump fuel tanks, so that way, like whenever you go to pre-flight an aircraft, one of the kind of the traditions of, doesn't matter where you go in aviation, and this always seems to happen, is that you'll go up to do a pre-flight on an aircraft. You'll hit the fuel sump, and it'll pour out into like a jar or a tester or something to that effect. You'll then hold up to the light and look at it and inspect it for fuel or for water. What ends up happening is that fuel sump is at the lowest point of the tank, and if there's any water in there, it'll pull up right there, and it comes out through the sump whenever you remove it. You'll also get a bunch of trash and dirt and stuff that could potentially also be in the fuel tank that got in there one way or another. In GA, like, you're going to turn around and you as the pilot are going to go out to it, and you'll usually do your own fuel sample inspection. In your more commercial settings, whoever's the mechanic that's responsible for releasing that aircraft to the pilot will usually take the fuel sample and set it out in some predetermined place for the pilot to inspect, or just hand it to them. fuel and water mixed together is pretty easily determined. You'll see that with no water in it, you'll have a fuel sample that looks like just clear water. Really, honestly, it's just you can usually see straight through it. If it's 100 low lead, it'll have a blue tinge to it, and that's what it looks like. But if there's water in it, there'll be little bubbles, like little beads on the bottom. If there's a lot of water, it'll fill up, and you'll see a clear horizon of where the water ends and the fuel begins. Now, typically, water gets into a fuel system by somebody leaving a cap off, but it can be that they ran the fuel down and left a bunch of air in there, and then let the plane sit up for a week or so. And what will end up happening is that a temperature inversion will happen. The water will collect is like the air, the moisture in the air will collect on the sides of the fuel tanks, and they'll drip down in there, and that's how you get it. And so you always want to be sure. And I have a personal rule that I always take 2 samples if I'm going to fly an airplane. Reason being is that I've seen it before where on a OH-58 they came out with and we used mason jars, and we would have to fill them all the way up. So think about it, it's about that tall, right? They come up, we would get up underneath it, and we would fill up we'd turn the petcock and let the fuel sample fill up, and we filled one up. And it was almost to the very, very top, and I thought the very top of the fuel sample looked weird. I started looking at it, and I was like, man, it just does not look right. And you'd swirl it, because if you would swirl it, if there's any like little water bubbles on the bottom, it would kick them up, and you would be able to see them a lot easier. And I was like, well, there's a little bit of trash in there, but nothing that's like super duper concerning. But I couldn't figure out why it just looked so different. So we poured it out, and we took another one. Then the next one had very clear, like a fuel horizon in it, where like the water hit the bottom and filled up just maybe about a 1/4 inch, and then the rest was fuel. And I realized that something had happened. There was enough water in that tank to fill up one whole mason jar. What we were seeing at the very top was the fuel that actually had made it into the sample was just separated and sitting at the top of the water. Now, had we launched that aircraft, that would probably been a bad day for everybody involved. But luckily, like just by kind of being like, vigilant and checking it, we caught that early on. So ever since then, I've always taken 2 fuel samples. I do one for me and then one for the crew, and one for my homies, that kind of thing. So always check and make sure that there's not water in the fuel. Now, another thing that can happen, especially in jet fuel, is microorganisms that will grow in there. Now, without going into all the biology that goes into it, essentially there are microorganisms that will live off of some of the things that are in jet fuel. Now, if you're in a warm, humid environment, it's even worse. There's additives that go into jet fuel to help try to kill those organisms off. But if the fuel is allowed to set up for a long period of time, you could have like a literal ecosystem inside of your fuel system, and that will cause all kinds of problems, because any other ecosystem, there's waste products, and those waste products get into the fuel, and then when you're talking about like 1/20th of a human hair kind of diameter, it could plug up filters or cause any number of problems. Okay, so let's talk about some fuel additives that you could potentially have in fuel. One of them is called a surfactant, and effectively what this does is it attaches itself to impurities in the fuel and turns it into goop or sludge that you will find at the bottom of the fuel tank if you were to drain it. That's where sludge comes from. Now, the next one is toluene, which can be added to some types of gasoline to produce an anti-knock effect in the fuel to keep the engine from knocking. You generally won't see that in aviation fuels, but it could be one that you would encounter. One of the older ones that has since gone away is aromatics. Aromatics, back when there were reciprocating engines, were kind of like the mainstay of aviation. Aromatic fuels gave the kind of a little extra punch, extra power. You generally see it in military aircraft and in high power usage of like cargo aircraft. Another one that is still very much in use today is lead. 100 low lead is indicative, or uses lead to increase the critical pressure and temperature of the fuel. This allows for it to have more power, be more stable, and prevent detonation at altitude. One that is common with jets is Prist, or it's just any sort of anti-ice type of fuel. You can have Jet A positive and negative, which has two different freezing points. Key differentiator would probably be cost between the two of them. That all kind of comes down to what's been mixed into that fuel, like Prist, to keep the fuel from freezing. Now, it has to get pretty cold for Jet A to freeze, but it can freeze, and so that's something to remember. There's a bunch of biocides that can be mixed in with jet fuel as well to help kill off fungus. So all of these are additives that can be found inside of jet fuel, and you may be called upon to mix some, and you may be called upon to service an aircraft that has had those additives mixed in. Okay, so now let's talk about defueling and fueling aircraft. Now this is, we're going to start talking about defueling first because it's simpler and it's probably more likely what you're going to be doing as a mechanic. You will fuel aircraft, but it seems more often than not that the situation always seems to call for you to defuel it, and then they'll have someone that's like a line service technician be the one to actually refuel an aircraft. So let's talk about defueling an aircraft. So the first thing that you want to do when you're defueling an aircraft is ground it. Make sure that there's no chance that there's going to be an electrical arc. Now, dealing with Jet A and stuff is generally more stable, but with avgas and stuff, it's just like regular gasoline. It doesn't take a whole lot to get it going. But either way, you don't want to take a risk with either one of them. So grounding it will help get rid of all those free electrons that are just kind of sitting on the surface of the aircraft and mitigate the risk of a static electricity jump igniting a fire. And keep in mind, this isn't like your typical like 5 gallon, like let me fill up my mower type of situation. There's hundreds of gallons in a lot of these aircraft, sometimes even more if you're talking about like heavy commercial. They can be thousands and thousands of gallons packed onto this airplane. So if you get a fire going, it's going to be a big fire and not one that's going to be put out anytime soon. So that being said, you want to make sure that it's grounded. Make sure that all electrical equipment is off. The best case scenario is disconnect the battery if you can. If you can disconnect the battery and make sure that everything is de-energized, then you're set to defuel. Because the thing is, when you're defueling, a lot of times it's going to take a lot longer than fueling an aircraft, depending on what you have. If you have like a single point defuel thing where you can drive a truck up there and suck the gas out of it, it's not really that bad. And then there'll be specific procedures for that inside the AMM. So just follow along with that. Whatever it tells you to do that. But like if you're in a situation where you have like a Learjet that doesn't have that sort of technology on board, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Or it's like an Aztec. So typically what's going to end up happening is that you're going to find a fuel sump point. If there's not a single point system to take the fuel out, you're going to find like a sump point. You're going to attach a hose, and that hose is going to go to some sort of container, and you're just going to let it gravity feed into it. You're going to pop the cap open, usually put like a rag or something over to make sure that thing gets in there, and then that will release the vacuum and let the fuel go. Okay, as the fuel goes, you want to make sure that somebody has got eyes on it at all times, because what you don't want to have happen is like something small, like either a fuel leak, get fuel everywhere, and then it goes into an uncontrolled space, and you have like an EPA situation, and you also have a safety situation because now you have fuel that's all over the place that's really volatile that could ignite and cause a major problem. You also could have a situation where you want to make sure that you're standing by while you're watching it with a fire extinguisher. So you have that fire extinguisher and you're ready to put out the fire at any one moment. And lastly, let's talk about wearing eye protection. So as you're defueling it, usually defueling outside of a single point system is going to be kind of a messy process. You're either going to have fuel that's just dripping straight into a container from a fuel cell. You're going to have a line that maybe you've gotten contained in one way, shape, form, or fashion, but the airplane is not really designed to have fuel coming out of it. It's just a maintenance procedure that you have to do. Whenever you have those types of situations, nothing is ideal. Like wind could blow and blow fuel around. like a hose could come loose or whatever, and more often than not, fuel is going to splash all over the place. So two things, like one, you want to make sure that you have some sort of eye pro on if you're going to be around it, because it's going to splash on you. And number two is that if any of it gets on your skin or your clothes, you're going to want to get out of that as soon as you possibly can, because if not, it will irritate your skin and you won't be a happy camper afterwards. Okay, so as we go to fuel an aircraft, the first thing we want to do is make sure that it is ground safe. That means that it's grounded and that there's no power on the jet whatsoever. That the ideal scenario is that the batteries are disconnected, so there can be no chance of some sort of errant electrical discharge. Now, that won't always be possible. Sometimes you might be at a gate, or you're doing a hot refuel or whatever. And that situation, the best thing that you can really do is just ground the jet and then follow the AMM procedures, so that way you're as safe as you possibly can. Next, don't carry anything in your shirt pocket. These items could fall into the fuel tanks. So if you're leaned over on a fuel cell like the Aztec here, be very cognizant of what is above that fuel tank. Because once it goes in there, getting it out is not a fun task. And to do it correctly, it's going to require you to completely drain the fuel out of it totally, because you can't just go, taking a mechanical fingers or something that you may be able to see the thing that you dropped, and then putting those mechanical fingers into the fuel, because you're going to contaminate that fuel. And fuel contamination is something we absolutely do not want. We just can't afford to take the chance that there's something that causes the engine to stutter and stop, at 15,000, 16,000 feet up in the air. That's just not acceptable. Then number three is ensure no flame producing devices are carried by anyone engaged in the fueling operation. A moment of carelessness could cause an accident. So essentially, nobody should be smoking around the aircraft. Nobody should be smoking anywhere on the flight line, much less anywhere close to a fueling aircraft. But this also says no flame producing devices. So one of the ways that you could have flame being produced is someone that's soldering with a butane soldering iron. That could potentially cause a fire. Because keep in mind, it's not just the fuel, but it's the fumes off the fuel, and those fumes generally go downhill. They don't just go up in the air and evaporate. They'll run down before they dissipate. So if you are sitting on the side of a hill, even at a slight incline, you're fueling upwind or uphill of it, and then those fumes hit the ground and roll down there, and some guys like soldering, it could light those fumes and then come right back to you and blow up the gas tank right there in your face. So make sure that no one around you has a flame producing device that they're actually using. Number four is ensure that the proper type and grade of fuel is used. Don't mix avgas and jet fuel. Make sure you're using the right gas. It's pretty simple. All right, lastly, before you actually put the nozzle in and you pull the trigger and start putting gas in there, make sure you have the right grade of gas that aircraft is calling for. Don't put Jet A into an avgas plane, and don't put avgas into a Jet A plane. That's bad news. The best thing to do is, before you actually pull the trigger on that nozzle, look at the placard that's right in front of you. Almost every single aircraft has a sticker that will say "this fuel only" on it, and then turn around and look at the fuel truck and say, like, is it the same one that I'm looking at right there? If it says 100 low lead on the plane, and you look over there, you see Jet A, then that's what you don't want to do. Same thing for fuel pumps. It'll be very clearly marked what type of fuel that is and what type of fuel is supposed to go into the plane. Don't mix and match, because nothing fun happens whenever you do that. You want to make sure that all the sumps are drained, and make sure that there's no water in the fuel whatsoever. This is specifically for aircraft that have sat for a while. Now, if a plane lands and it shuts down and you fuel right there, you still may want to go up there and take a fuel sample, but there's less of a chance that water's had a chance to accumulate in that fuel cell, but it may have. And so taking a fuel sample will be like a little insurance policy that's very low cost and could have a potentially high payoff. So take a fuel sample, sump the tanks, and make sure that there's no gas, there's no water in the fuel. Make sure that whenever you put the nozzle in, don't let the nozzle touch the rim of the gas tank, for two reasons. One is you don't want to take a chance that there's going to be like a static discharge of that last like little millimeter and then ignite the fuel cells. It's just like one little safety measure. Just simply put your hand on there and let it rest, so that way it stays airborne and it doesn't actually sit on the fuel tank. Another reason is that like there's a big people will get into a bad habit of sticking the fuel nozzle in and let it sit to where it sits kind of like so inside of the fuel tank. that could potentially cause it to dent the rim and then cause a fuel leak or water incursion later on. And you just don't want to damage the airplane in general. So it's best just to not be lazy, make a fist and let the nozzle rest on your hand and just kind of like hold it over that hole, or whatever your methodology is. Make sure don't let the fuel nozzle touch the tank if you can help it. Contaminated fuel is worse than not having any fuel at all. At least with not having any fuel at all, you know that you don't have any fuel and you can't go anywhere. But contaminated fuel, it makes you think you can go somewhere, then you get going, and then something happens to your fuel. So having like trying to fuel during a windstorm, a rainstorm, or something like that, it's just bad news. Don't do it. Don't fuel an aircraft whenever there's lightning 5 miles out. I'll take that a step further, and like the longest known lightning strike from a cloud was 11 miles. So that was like a cloud over here, 11 miles down there. I believe, if I remember right, it was a surfer that got popped by lightning. Don't fuel aircraft whenever that potential is there, because if a lightning strike's not bad enough, a lightning strike and then a follow-on aircraft fuel fire is even worse. So be cognizant of like what the weather's doing around you, and make sure that you're not trying to fuel up while lightning could be potentially popping. Lastly, and this is a sneaky one, don't fuel around any place that could have ground radar operating.